What's up, everyone? Some of you may have seen the trailer for the new X-Men 97 series coming out in just a month. I'm not here to analyze that trailer like some of you will be doing. Instead, I'm going to start a series I've always wanted to make, breaking down everything that was near and dear to my heart about the original, the iconic, X-Men the Animated Series. We will go season by season, episode by episode where it applies. For any of you interested in the upcoming continuation, I hope to give you a Cliff's Notes on what happened in the original story, cover all the major story arcs, and most importantly, all the moments of the series that were truly powerful, at least in my eyes, that caused the series to be so beloved and leave such an impact on our psyches. This is Rose-Colored Reviews with X-Men the Animated Series. Being now 40 years old, I kind of have an advantage of being just the right age at the time these came out to truly fall in love with the original series. The X-Men expanded my understanding of what a superhero drama should really be about. Before X-Men, I was Team Ninja Turtles. I also enjoyed Power Rangers. These were fun kids shows with entertaining characters and villains, but they lacked significant emotional depth and sometimes felt cheap and disposable when looking at them through a more nuanced lens. The X-Men show, which ran from 1992 to 1997 on Saturday morning's Fox Kids segment, treated their child audience as mature young people capable of grasping the nuance of complex moral decisions, prejudice, and dreams of a better future for all. Only Batman the Animated Series could really rival X-Men in terms of depth and intelligence in the kids' cartoon form at the time. So, our story begins with Season 1, Episodes 1 and 2, Night of the Sentinels. Generally, the temptation is to start an X-Men series with a battle against Magneto, but the showrunners were a bit more careful here and faced them against the heartless, robotic Sentinels. This 2-episode arc served to show us just how much discrimination exists on the part of humans against mutants. The Sentinels, while enormous and terrifying, are robotic soldiers designed to destroy all mutants. They're also a bit impractical. On occasion, the show does have some sneaky humor it slips in. A lot of it is dated and doesn't always land with modern audiences, but once in a while, it can catch you by surprise. Some of these have become memes, but that humor is very much present here too.
Mommy! Buy me that! I was being a mutant anyway! No! Not again!
Hey, you! Do you know how much that game costs?
Yeah, $1/4.
Aside from the Sentinels and the anti-mutant sentiment among humans, this story arc really focuses on Jubilee, the totally rad 90s orphan teenage girl who irreverently chews bubblegum while donning her iconic pink shades, yellow trench coat, and messy hair. Jubilee serves as the audience surrogate. She's just realizing she has mutant powers, and it's really cramping her style. Oh right, and the Sentinels are kind of after her. It all comes to a head when she encounters them in the mall, and some of the X-Men just happen to be on the scene and help her out. Storm and Rogue by pounding the Sentinel in question, Gambit by helping her get away, and Cyclops by attacking the Sentinel from outside. Jubilee wakes up inside the X-Men infirmary, very confused and just trying to sneak out. There, she stumbles onto the Danger Room, where Wolverine appears to be ready to murder Gambit with his claws. In a surge of determination, Jubilee lets loose her powers to send Wolverine flying and apparently saves Gambit's life. This brings us to Beast and Morph to check in. When they realize what happened, they break into fits of laughter. Now, because this story is being told from the perspective of a scared kid, it's not immediately obvious why they would find this funny. It's only after having watched the series for a bit that this starts to make sense. Badass Wolverine got taken out in the Danger Room by a little teenage girl who's not on the team and doesn't even know what she's doing. After seeing the episode a few times, it's hard not to laugh along with the two of them, but at first, it's kind of disorienting. I guess you could say this gives the episode some kind of replay value, though. Morph, of course, is the only character on the team that at the time nobody was familiar with. He was never a regular canon X-Man in the comics. Yes, there was a changeling character in the comics that ended up helping the team and was retconned into being identified with the character Morph, but they weren't really the same guy. Changeling never had Morph's look, appearance, personality, etc., and was never a known member of the team until after he had already been killed off. He was kind of a retcon used to bring Professor X back from the dead. So yes, Morph was a totally new character for the series. And Morph was kind of intriguing in the fact that he didn't take himself too seriously, and he liked to joke around, even had somewhat of a sinister laugh to him. His shape-shifting abilities seemed to allow for endless possibilities. Of course, this was just one of the characters they were introducing us to for the first time. You were also being given your first look at the entire team. You got a sense of Cyclops and Professor's relationship. You see Storm's compassion and her belief in the team's goal with how she explains this all to Jubilee. In fact, she may be the perfect person to get Jubilee up to speed. And of course, she utters a line that would get endlessly repeated throughout the first season as the core lesson of the story arc. People fear what they do not understand. This is how the discrimination towards mutants is framed. I'm not sure it's quite that simple. I think it's a lot more like people fear those who could easily wipe them out of existence, but it works well in framing the story and does a lot to make the struggle feel like a parable for all kinds of discrimination in society. And that is important, because that's exactly what the X-Men are all about. Shortly after this, the story shifts from Jubilee to the X-Men's mission to infiltrate the Mutant Control Agency and destroy their files so they can no longer target various mutants. This is the same agency that built the Sentinels. The Professor gives them their briefing and who will go in and who will stay back. Notably, Jean is to stay in the mansion with Professor X, and of course, Jubilee is not an official member of the team yet, so there's not really a question there. Of course, Jubilee would run away to try to contact her foster parents because this takes place in a time period before cell phones were commonplace. She gets smoke bombed by a Sentinel and taken hostage and interrogated by Henry Gyrick, the head of the agency. We are introduced to Gyrick and Trask, and it's made clear that Trask is the mastermind behind the process of creating the Sentinels, but he has a stronger moral compass than Gyrick. Trask doesn't seem like a bad guy per se. He thinks he's legitimately protecting the humans against the threat of evil, out-of-control mutants, but Gyrick holds the power in the relationship, and he is a bad guy. During the mission, as the X-Men make the trip, we hear team members' insights into how and why they are what they are to help further familiarize us with the characters. Morph is the only one who seemingly loved having mutant powers, while everyone else seemed to struggle with it growing up. But after that, you start to see some cracks in Morph's confidence. First, he asks Beast for help throwing him over the security fence, and Beast is happy to oblige, but Morph clearly hasn't practiced this move in the danger room as he awkwardly crashes to the ground with no grace whatsoever. But he is able to recover, transform into a guard, and knock his fellow guard out with a knockout gas gun, so there is that. Still, he's not exactly graceful here. Later on, as they're racing into the doorway of the compound, several team members run right in, while Morph awkwardly bangs his shoulder on the edge of the doorway. I used to wonder, why even write that element into the story? It has no significance. But then I realized the writers are telling us in a very subtle way that this clumsy, klutzy Morph might be unfit to be a member of the team and maybe about to get his comeuppance. The episode ends on a cliffhanger where the team is about to open a door that has a series of guards with their guns trained on said door. Pretty standard fare, and the cliffhanger is resolved when Wolverine tips the team off that he smells gun oil and that there are guards on the other side. So Storm blows the door open with a fierce whirlwind that upends all the guards on the other side, and the problem is solved just like that. The team gets into the room with the computers to destroy the files, and Beast tries to manually erase them on the computer while Wolverine holds the door. Eventually, Storm destroys a monitor stating there's no further time. This makes me wonder if the files were actually destroyed, or if they could simply have replaced the monitor and gotten all that information right back. But that would depend on how old or how new this computer was. The fight eventually takes them outside, and they run towards the Blackbird to get away until they are met with Sentinels. This leads to one of the darkest, most tragic moments of the series, when Morph pushes Wolverine out of the way of an incoming Sentinel blast, only to get shot in the chest and seemingly killed. Of course, they do everything they can in the show to make it unclear initially that this is what happened. I think the censors must have struggled to allow a death to be depicted on screen in a kid's show, so what you actually get is this.
First we charge the car, then we blow it up. Life don't get much better than this. After you, mon ami.
Come on, move it. We're missing dinner.
Didn't I tell you? Clear sailing all the way.
Hey,
Tin Woodsman, I'm sending you back to Oz in pieces.
Wolverine! Pull back! What's wrong, Jean?
It's Morph. Can't you feel it?
Morph? I don't sense anything.
So Jean is in pain, and Professor doesn't sense anything, which is supposed to imply that Morph has no mental presence and is therefore dead. But as a kid, that can be interpreted many different ways and is very confusing, at least until you see the next scene where the team is struggling with their grief and angst coming off the jet. Plus, that music. Dear God, that music. They really set out to trauma bond you to these characters, and it sure as hell worked. Then we get this iconic moment.
Cyclops,
I know how you feel about it, Wolverine, but...
you know nothing, little man. Next time, I use these.
I've taken it out from you!
Let's do it. Let's see how tough you are when you ain't giving orders.
Cyclops! Wolverine! Stop it.
Soldier Boy here left them behind. For all we know, Morph and Beast may still be alive.
Beast is...
What about Morph?
He's gone, mon ami.
Holy shit, this is a lot. So there's a whole bunch of shit that went down that we're not caught up on. We have Storm and Jean both in tears, and Wolverine taking his anger out on Cyclops with a well-placed kidney punch. This shows us the infamous tension and rivalry between the two characters for the first time, but notably, Wolverine would never disrespect Cyclops this much again for the remainder of the series. If anything, you see Wolverine's begrudging respect for the X-Men's leader gradually grow over time. Of course, Wolverine was not done here, because next we get this.
Cyclops, I made him a convertible.
What happened isn't his fault. Wolverine! It's not your fault either.
This iconic scene goes down as simultaneously the most badass and edgy moment of Wolverine's run on the show, as he demolishes the top half of his field leader's car with his adamantium claws, but also one of the saddest and most heartfelt moments. If you look at this from a more empathetic Jean Grey type perspective, it took a tremendous amount of emotional pain for Wolverine to do what he did, and you could feel that pain profoundly in this scene. Now by this point, there is no mention yet of Wolverine's unrequited love for Jean Grey. But of course, when you go back and rewatch this episode after you know that, it adds just another layer on top of an already very messy emotional subtext. We next see Wolverine driving away and reliving the Vietnam horror that was the team's attempted getaway from the compound, and the viewer finally gets a clear sense of what happened. We see Morph push Wolverine out of the way of a Sentinel blast, which led to him being hit, and we see Beast was shot and sent flying into an electric fence, where he was captured and would eventually be arrested and imprisoned for the remainder of the first season. We see more of the battle that took place, and then Cyclops making the call that would haunt him for eternity. Or at least for the rest of Season 1.
Cyclops, we are being overwhelmed. We must retreat.
Come on, Wolverine, let's go!
Eat dirt, Cyclops. X-Men don't cut and run. I'm going back for Beast and Morph.
We can't help them.
Maybe you can't, Junior, but I can.
I won't let you throw your life away. Come back here.
I go where I wanna go.
Sorry. Not this time, sugar. Gotta be careful to pull out enough of your energy to stop you without hurting you.
Morph. Beast. Don't leave him.
Now, to me, it's kind of clear that Wolverine had every right to be pissed off. Any army or combat personnel will tell you that you do whatever it takes on the battlefield to rescue your own wounded members and not leave them to die. Now add to the fact that this combat team has fantastical mutant powers. Multiple members on the team can fly, and Rogue also has super strength. Wolverine is immortal, and Cyclops can shoot large beams of concussive force from a great distance. You're telling me that there's no way this group can buy enough time against the Sentinels to go back and recover 2 incapacitated team members before they meet their demise. Rogue, who decided to side with Team Cyclops, seemed to have the best chance to go lift the extraordinarily heavy beast to safety, while Wolverine could have easily handled carrying Morph. Cyclops, Storm, and Gambit could have all used their powers for cover against Sentinel attacks from a safe distance. It's not rocket science. They didn't have to actually defeat the Sentinels here, just hold them off for a few minutes. But it was Cyclops and Storm's viewpoint that the Sentinels had just landed too many punches, the team was fighting a losing battle, and they had to get out of there before things got worse, even if it meant leaving team members behind. This may be the most troubling aspect of the story arc, and it's one that was referenced indirectly throughout the season as something that haunted Cyclops and Wolverine. Finally, we see Wolverine alone on a cliff's edge, simply saying,
I'll avenge you, my friend. I swear it.
The death of Morph, as tragic as it was, wasn't heartbreaking because of any attachment we had built up around Morph as a character. It was heartbreaking because we saw how much it tore apart the rest of the team. We had now seen the X-Men in their first mission, and as powerful as they were, they lost. And the cost was high, and they could not just shake it off emotionally either. You weren't going to get all this on an episode of Power Rangers. I also have to mention that Morph's decision to push Wolverine out of the way of a Sentinel laser blast, while noble, is also really dumb on its face. Wolverine is his best friend on the team, so Morph knows Wolverine can absorb and survive almost anything. Meanwhile, Morph has the strength and endurance of an average human. He has to know this, but apparently emotion and loyalty got the better of him in the heat of the moment. At least, I'd prefer to say it's that, because the alternative is to say it's shoddy writing, and I'd like to give the show the benefit of the doubt when I can. That's probably why I called it rose-colored reviews. I'm sure there's a ruby quartz lens joke to be had here somewhere, but I'm not feeling clever enough at the moment to work this in here. So, anyway, Cyclops comes to Wolverine in an apparent attempt to make peace and tell him how he plans to find and attack the actual Sentinels base, which seems to work pretty well. Before you know it, the X-Men are ambushing the Sentinels instead of the other way around. They free Jubilee, take out the Sentinels in the warehouse, and Wolverine gets this moment.
This one's for you, Morph.
That I guess avenges Morph, but I don't know. It's not like this was the exact model that shot him, and even if it was, it's cold, unfeeling machinery. It's a moment that a lot of people like to think is pretty powerful, but I always kind of questioned it just a bit. It lands somewhat for me, I guess, but that's fine because this two-parter was packed with plenty of other really profound and powerful moments that won me over anyway. Jubilee is then shown saying goodbye to her foster parents and hailing a cab to permanently stay at Professor Xavier's school. As she finds her way back to the mansion and has the front door open for her, there is a moment shared between Scott and Jean.
Jean. Back there with Beast and Morph. Do you think I did the right thing?
You did what you had to do. So did they.
I thought this moment, as simple as it was very interesting. At the time, in 1992, there was a very common line used on shows like this that you expected Jean to say, and she didn't say it. Normally on TV, the person in Jean's position would almost always say, "You did what any one of us would have done," to comfort the character dealing with this guilt trip. Jean stopped short of saying that because it clearly wasn't true. Wolverine obviously would have done things very differently, and Jean, being the most empathetic character on the team and the one that can read minds, truly understood the perspectives on both sides. So her message to Cyclops, her teammate and romantic partner, was simply that because both Cyclops and Wolverine truly felt they were doing the right thing in the moment, perhaps neither one of them was actually wrong. This is a question that people around the world who have wrestled with their own personal regret and tragedy have asked themselves, and the X-Men, in their very first two-part story arc, found a way to answer that question in a way that sidestepped the popular cliches of the time and could still be both comforting but also very honest. And with that, Night of the Sentinels came to a close, showing us just how different X-Men was going to be from everything else on TV at the time. The two-parter starts being all about the struggle of teenage Jubilee, but halfway through, it kind of hands the narrative off to the X-Men team that rescued her and manages to make the story about them for the rest of the way. Many of you probably know that before this two-parter, there was a 1989 failed pilot called Pride of the X-Men, with a completely different art style in an attempt to get an X-Men series off the ground. If you've ever seen it, you know that while some of the animation it featured was really cool, the writing was poor and the cliches were quite dated in 80s animation. In that episode, Kitty Pryde was the audience surrogate in the role that Jubilee had in Night of the Sentinels. Kitty was a scared teenage girl introduced to the team and shown how to properly use her powers. But the execution of that, while maybe acceptable for kids' shows at the time somewhat, left a lot to be desired and was immensely approved upon in the Fox Kids version of this, even if that still wasn't perfect. I think with the superhero boom of the 21st century, writing characters like these has evolved in certain notable ways. The best example I can think of is the character of Daisy Johnson in Marvel's ABC series Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which started in 2013. She was the audience surrogate and main character of the first few episodes, and it could be argued first few seasons of that show. She was hip, cool, and clever, much like Jubilee was portrayed, and also quite challenged and compromised in any kind of combat situation. But modern superhero stories often require characters to have arcs, and through that series, we saw Daisy find her powers, harness them, and become the all-powerful being known as Quake. This was quite the satisfying transformation and very empowering for the viewer, but early 90s TV was much more known for maintaining the status quo. If someone was a weak character, they may have occasional moments of breaking the mold, but generally, they were going to either stay that way or return to how you always knew them to be. Sadly, for that reason, we never really get to see Jubilee unlock her true potential in the series. She often is a detriment to the team and an easy target for ridicule on the show. But she does have her moments, and I don't hate her as a character. On a good day, she is a female John Connor from Terminator 2. On a bad day, she is a human form of Slippy Toad from Star Fox 64. Also, I should mention that this two-parter also weaves in speeches from Senator Kelly, a prominent adversary of the X-Men throughout Season 1. He was also featured in the first X-Men movie in 2000. Kelly, while not a very interesting or colorful character, is a representation of public-facing political opposition that mutants have in the world. He acts as a barometer for how much the X-Men need to do to combat the anti-mutant sentiment in the world. When the series continues and enter Magneto and Deadly Reunions, we finally see the X-Men duke it out with their most famous rival, Magneto, and to a lesser extent, Sabretooth. In the next video, we will cover how Magneto was introduced in another truly powerful two-parter that really helped build the show's foundation. That's all I have for you right now. I'll be back soon enough. Bub.